song.
Is it?
Anyway.
So my name is Dr. Hayleigh Bosher and I'm a senior lecturer in intellectual property law, and as you know, I recently wrote a book called Copyright in the Music Industry, which was the inspiration for this podcast.
My name's Jules. I'm a specialist music lawyer partner at Sound Advice in Tileyard, which Tileyard being probably the biggest music enclave of music businesses in Europe. And I've also had a very long career as a DJ under the stage name Judge Jules. I've been a radio presenter, done lots and lots of other things within the music industry.
Hi, I'm Condon. I'm Public Affairs Manager at PRS Music. PRS is the Performing Rights Society. So we're a collective management organisation that looks after songwriters, composers and publishers. So we look after the underlying composition as distinct from the sound recording.
I'll throw you a nice general question here and ask why you think copyright is important to creatives.
While copyright isn't simple, it is so simple. It protects the work of those lucky enough to be creative and to be talented, and means that they are paid when others use or are benefiting from their work. And, that's really important. It really frustrates me when people go, oh, copyright's such a hindrance to innovation. It's simple. You can get a license for any usage. And if you're seeking to innovate and create something of your own, don't you want to be able to protect your creation and to benefit from it when other people are using it?
But do you think any artistic work can ever be truly original?
In reality, it's not going to be original in the purest sense of the word. But I think, it's about being able to absorb your influences and make of them your own. There's a difference between influence and sampling.
And in order to infringe a work, you need to infringe a substantial proportion of the work. And over the years, there's been an element of debate about what that actually constitutes, and sampling brought that into the legal debate.
But to say that I'm not a judge, but then it sounded too much like a pun.
Most of these decisions are purely adjudicated upon by judges, but it's the expert witnesses and their testimonies that leads to the, in those few cases that have actually reached the courts, it's the expert witnesses whose opinions have actually swayed the decisions of the judges.
It's a really interesting kind of interplay though, because sometimes just because two songs sound the same doesn't mean that there's copyright infringement, because that's not the test. As Jules said, it's about taking a substantial part, which is a question of if you have taken the original part. And so it's not always a question of the music, it's also a question of the law. The question of whether you've heard the work or not is a really low threshold. And on some of the recent big US cases, like the Katy Perry one, they're like, if you have X number of YouTube views, probably they heard it. And you're like, well, not when you think about the grand scale of YouTube. So that does frustrate me. But Jules, I just want to ask you, because you mentioned that you work a lot with musicology reports and musicologists, and Ali, you just said about the whole, more and more cases. But would you say that you're using musicology reports more now?
No, I've always used them, and they're used more outside of litigation, I would say, than they're used within litigation. They're used, if you like, as a shield to prevent the party on the other side from having a go, for want of a better description, preemptively.
It's the cutest story how the musicologists became part of copyright litigation, actually. It's to do with this case. I'll try and remember it off the top of my head, but it's in the playlist. And it's the Chariots of Fire song. The story goes that they had this young apprentice come along and wanted to get involved in the case. And he was actually a composer, and it was taken seriously. And the judge relied on his evidence when they made the decision. And that paved the way for now.
Wow.
And as you say, now musicology is really important in copyright litigation, and also, as you say, Jules, actually preempting and decision making before it even gets that far. But yeah, I love that story. It just sounds like a fairy tale, doesn't it? Like this random apprentice stumbles upon the case.
Tell us a bit more about the European or the EU Copyright Directive and its impact on the sort of copyrights that you're looking after.
So from a PRS perspective, the Article 17 is conceived to rectify the imbalance in the digital market for music. And for all creative works, actually, it's about clarifying that online platforms are liable for the use of protected works on their service. Safe harbor or the hosting defense, depending on your preference. This basically enables platforms to kind of limit their liability, or in some cases deny it entirely, which means that rights holders either don't get paid adequately, or maybe they don't get paid at all. I will say, just Article 17 isn't perfect. So, it doesn't fix all of the problems that might come up in the course of this, but it's a step forward.
What your experience of dealing with artists and PRS members are in terms of their understanding of kind of copyright law and what it represents, and indeed that whether there's the extent to which they're interested in it as a standalone subject.
It's definitely mixed in terms of, I definitely meet a wide variety, as you said, like some are super interested, really engaged, really proactively engaged with the principles that underpin their rights, really sort of want to understand. But oftentimes they will kind of say, now that I'm getting older. So I think there is an element of, when you're a young writer or a young artist and, you're pursuing your career and you're trying to build your career, those details aren't necessarily at the forefront of your mind. It's a bit like your car. You don't really care how it works most of the time until something goes wrong, or you reach a point where, you have a really nice car and you want to understand it because it's kind of like a piece of art. I think there's that kind of gap in desire to know. And I think oftentimes people will rely on their lawyer or their accountant and kind of think somebody will take care of this for me. But it does cost you money. And also you're never really going to understand what your statement is about, or sort of why things are the way they are, if you don't engage with your rights. Part of my role at PRS has always been to get our members involved in what we do in terms of policy and public affairs work. And it's great to have young writers involved because it's so compelling for the people who are making the decisions, because they also see that this is affecting their future. It's not coming from the perspective of, I've had a great career because of copyright. It's like, I won't have a career unless you sort of protect and preserve copyright.
It's quite an interesting one because for me as a lawyer, as a specialist music lawyer, but with an artistic background, I mean, I'm forever telling my clients, who are generally significantly younger than me, my artist clients, about my story, which is that I was lucky enough with recordings and with publishing to kind of get rights back, and after a rights period of 10 or 15 years, back they come. Suddenly you can make a lot more money out of them, and you can almost see some of their eyes rolling back, because the thought, if you can think in more than a 5-year plan when you're in your kind of 20s or even your 30s, you're a better person than me. I certainly couldn't, but now I'm going to look back on the value of having rights and actually fighting to only give those rights away in the first instance for a short period of time takes on more relevance.
Copyright isn't a particularly sexy topic when you're young, but then as I said, as you get older, you suddenly realize actually hanging on to those rights. I once had a composer describe it to me as, it's my wage, it's my mortgage, it's my pension. My rights are everything. You might not be in a position today to feel that it's important. And again, not a particularly, fun and exciting conversation, but you're probably not paying into a pension. So by protecting your rights and sort of maintaining that respect for your rights, hopefully you will still be generating income, because you don't want to let that value seep away.
Yeah, I mean, the week we're recording this, Bob Dylan and Stevie Nicks both sold catalogues in the hundreds of millions in the case of Bob Dylan, and the tens of millions in the case of Stevie Nicks. And whilst most songwriters won't have a catalogue of the quality of Fleetwood Mac and kind of Bob Dylan, nevertheless, if you've even got one or two so-called evergreen copyrights, you've got one or two hit records that generate a bit of radio play, then those rights are effectively a pension. And it's almost like pension is the least sexy word you can. You want to turn somebody off who's aged under 45, the P word does it better than anything. But the reality is that is what a set of rights really are. And sometimes when you see these big deals in the media that permeate beyond the kind of music press and into the mainstream media, and I know that Bob Dylan thing did, because I was interviewed by the Daily Telegraph for it. It's good because it makes people realise just how important copyrights are in the long term.
Without copyright, you're not going to have a career. You're never going to be a professional writer or a professional performer without copyright.